The wind cut through the Wyoming highlands like a blade, whistling a dirge only the wild could understand. Snow fell in slow, deliberate sheets, cloaking the land in silence. It was the kind of cold that bit down into bone, not with malice but with certainty, and anything that moved did so with caution. The storm had rolled in with no warning, swallowing the sun behind thick gray clouds, and now the world was white, lost, waiting. Mare squinted through the ranger station window, her breath fogging the glass. Her radio crackled uselessly beside her, the signal eaten by the storm hours ago. She rubbed her arms through her jacket, not for warmth but for resolve. The heater worked fine, her memories didn't. Not tonight. She hadn't meant to care so much. This wasn't her home. Not really. She'd only been stationed in the Laramie Basin for 4 months. A temporary reassignment, her superior had said. Give you time to heal. Fresh air, solitude, horses, you'll do better out there. But Mare didn't feel better. She hadn't touched her camera in weeks. She hadn't sent a letter to her mother since the night she failed to save the foal in Nevada. That image, small legs twisted in wire, the eyes clouded with pain, still woke her up gasping. She turned away from the window only to pause at the flicker of motion. At first she thought it was another gust shifting a bush. But it moved again, slower this time, and took shape, a dark silhouette staggering through the snow, legs trembling, head bowed. Mare's heart jumped. She grabbed her binoculars. A horse. Not just any horse. A wild mare. Heavy with foal. Dear God, she whispered. She grabbed her coat and emergency pack before the rest of her mind could catch up. Her boots hit the snow with a crunch, the wind howling a warning. The storm fought her every step, but Mare pressed forward, eyes locked on the fading outline of the mare in the distance. The mare moved like she was walking through water, each step heavier than the last. Her coat, once likely golden, was matted with ice and sleet. Her belly hung low, stretched tight, far too much for a wild horse in this weather. Mares didn't usually birth in winter. It was suicide. Most foals didn't survive, and often neither did the mother. But this one was still standing. Mare reached her slowly, hands low and voice calm. Hey there. Easy, girl. The mare stopped, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with exhaustion. Mare knew better than to get too close, but she could see it now. Frost clung to the mare's lashes, her breath came ragged and shallow, and her hooves bled into the snow with each step. She was close to collapse. I can't carry you, Mare muttered, thinking aloud. But I can get you somewhere. There was a shallow ravine nearby, partially shielded by rock. Mare angled herself, coaxing the mare forward with low sounds and slow movements. The mare followed, not from trust, but because she had no other choice. As they descended into the hollow, the wind dulled and the snow lightened for a moment. Mare helped the mare to the shelter of a narrow ledge and dropped to her knees, assessing. The mare's flanks quivered. The foal was coming, soon. Mare sat back, snow seeping into her jeans. She needed help. A vet. A transport team. Anything. But the radio wouldn't work out here, not in this weather. The ranger station was too far to run, and if she left, the mare wouldn't make it. She opened her emergency pack. Blankets. Knife. Saline. Nothing enough. Nothing like what she'd need if it turned complicated. Her breath came short, fogging in the dim air. Okay, she said softly, as if speaking could slow time. You're here. I'm here. We'll figure it out. The mare's ears flicked. Her legs trembled violently before she sank to the ground, letting out a low, guttural sound, half pain, half panic. Mare moved closer, cautiously, hands up. Shoo. I know. I'm not here to hurt you. Just breathe. We'll get through this. She knew she was talking to herself as much as to the mare. Her hands moved automatically, checking for any visible signs of distress. Blood trickled beneath the tail. The contractions had started. And then something shifted. Not the wind. Not the snow. The silence broke. A cry echoed across the basin. Thin. Haunting. Human. Mare froze. Her head snapped up. The mare's ears twitched violently. No one should be out here. No child should be screaming in this storm. But she heard it again, clearer this time. Not a child. Not a cry of pain. A newborn's wail. But the foal hadn't arrived yet. The mare was still heaving, still fighting. Mare turned, heart pounding. The sound had come from just over the ridge. And then it stopped. Nothing. Just the sound of her own pulse in her ears and the shallow gasps of the mare beside her. Was she hallucinating? Sleep-deprived? Delirious from grief and cold? She glanced at the mare. The animal's eyes were wide with fear now, not pain. She tried to rise, then dropped again. Another cry rang out. This one was closer. Real. Undeniable. Mira stood slowly, scanning the horizon. And then she saw it, a flicker of movement across the ridge, something dark stumbling through the snow. She left the mare only for a few paces, just enough to crest the hill. Nothing. No child. No foal. Only a half-collapsed tree twisted in the wind, its broken branches creaking like ribs. But the sound, it hadn't come from imagination. It had weight. She turned back toward the hollow and paused. The mare was no longer alone. A second figure now stood just feet away from the laboring horse. Tall. Motionless. A wild stallion. Even in the half-light of the storm, he looked like something carved from storm cloud and coal. His mane whipped in the wind, silver threads catching the dull light. He didn't move. Just stared at Mira, eyes unreadable. Mira's instinct screamed. She took a step back, unsure whether to raise her arms or drop to the snow. But the stallion didn't charge. He didn't threaten. Instead, he stepped closer to the mare and touched her muzzle with his. Softly. Slowly. A low nicker passed between them. The mare relaxed. Mira stood in silence, breath caught in her chest. Something in her shifted. She watched as the stallion circled the mare once, then stood guard at the hollow's edge, facing into the storm as if he knew what might come. Mira moved back to the mare and sat. Time passed in a blur of wind and worry. The storm howled above, but within the hollow there was stillness. The mare groaned. Her flanks clenched. And then, finally, something wet, fragile and trembling slipped into the snow. The foal. It didn't move. The mare nuzzled it, breathing heavy. Mira's heart lodged in her throat. Come on, come on. She reached forward, rubbing the foal with a towel from her pack. Still no breath. No twitch. Panic gripped her. No, she whispered. Not this time. Not again. She cleared the foal's mouth, tilted its head, began to rub its chest with quick, deliberate motions. Breathe. Just breathe. The stallion let out a loud, sharp cry that shattered the air. And then the foal shuddered. A gasp. A wet, shaky exhale. Its legs kicked weakly. Alive. Mira exhaled, blinking tears she hadn't felt form. The mare nosed her foal gently. The stallion moved no closer, but his eyes never left. For a moment, in that frozen hollow, surrounded by the storm's fury, there was only breath and warmth. Mira sat back, her body aching, hands shaking. But her heart had never been more still. The foal, small and slick, lifted its head, and looked at her. And somewhere behind them, far off in the white, a distant rumble echoed once more. Not a cry this time. Something else. Something deeper. Mira didn't know what it was. But she knew the story wasn't over. The snow eased its descent by morning, falling in softer strokes like a pen hesitating before a final line. Dawn barely broke through the clouds, casting the ravine in a faint, pewter glow. Mira sat motionless, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes fixed on the foal sleeping against its mother's side. The mare breathed evenly now. The worst had passed, for her at least. But Mira wasn't sure what to make of the stallion. He hadn't left. All night, he stood sentinel, his breath steaming in rhythmic clouds. He didn't approach, didn't flinch, didn't rest. His silence was deliberate, weighty, as if he carried more than just the storm's burden on his shoulders. She'd seen many wild horses in her years as a ranger and photographer, but none like him. There was something ancient in his stance, as though the snow didn't touch him the way it touched the world. And in his eyes, knowing. Mira rose slowly, her joints stiff from the cold, and pulled out a field camera from her pack. It had survived the night. She lifted it with quiet hands, adjusted the lens and focused. She barely had time to snap one photo before the stallion turned, fixing her with a stare so piercing it made her lower the camera. He didn't run. He didn't threaten. He just waited. Mira's heart beat unevenly. The foal stirred behind her, making a soft sound. The stallion turned back toward the little one and took a step forward, only to stop again. As if he too was waiting for permission. Mira watched in silence. The mare lifted her head and let out a low nicker. The stallion answered with a sound Mira had only heard once before. In Nevada years ago, when a dying stallion had called out to his herd for the last time. It was a deep, almost mournful vibration. Not loud. Not harsh. A name, perhaps, spoken in a language older than words. The foal responded, lifting its head and letting out a thin, weak whinny. The stallion finally approached, each step measured until he stood over them both. He lowered his head, touched the foal's nose gently, and stood like a monolith beside them. And Mira knew then, this wasn't just a stallion. This was the foal's sire. and something about that mattered. She stepped back quietly, giving the trio space, heart still racing. The stallion had no brand, no tag. He belonged to no preserve, no study group. Yet the structure of his body, broad chest, thick neck, proud stance, spoke of lineage one she couldn't yet name but knew instinctively was rare. She crouched by the edge of the ravine, pulled out her notepad and began sketching the stallion's features. Not for art. For record. There had been rumors years ago, whispers among biologists and ranchers, of a lost bloodline in the Laramie wilds. A line of Mustangs said to trace back to Spanish stock, untouched by domestic breeding, carrying the fire and fury of their ancestors. No one had ever confirmed it. Most thought it myth. A romantic tale buried in snowdrifts. But looking at him now, she felt the truth rise in her like breath after drowning. He wasn't just rare. He was feared extinct. She flipped her notepad to a clean page and began writing everything she remembered. Wide forehead, sloping shoulder, height near 16 hands, the silver strands in a coal dark mane, the flared nostrils and proud arch of the neck. And then she stopped. Because a name surfaced in her mind, a story more like a legend, of a stallion called Sorrel's Ghost. Black as night with lightning in his veins. Vanished 15 years ago during a blizzard. No remains ever found. Ranchers claimed he'd bred once, maybe twice, before disappearing. His foals, if any had lived, would be adults now. Ghost blood, some called it. Wild, untamable, and almost mythical. Mira stared at the stallion. Could it be? The stallion moved suddenly, lifting his head to the ridge. His ears twitched, then flattened. A sound reached Mira too, distant, unnatural. A growl. Oh, mechanical. An engine. Mira's blood froze. She scrambled to the ridge and peered over. Through the thinning snow, a black SUV rumbled across the valley. It didn't belong to the rangers. She could tell by the way it moved, too slowly, too deliberately, as if searching. Poachers? No. Too early in the day. Surveyors? Unlikely. There were no scheduled expeditions in this sector. Then she saw it, the glint of a long lens poking from the passenger window. A camera. Wildlife trackers. Not the government kind. The corporate kind. She dropped, heart pounding. The stallion hadn't moved. He stood firm beside his family, tail swishing, body rigid. They're looking for you, Mira whispered. And they'd find him. That ridge wasn't far. The sun was rising. If they had thermal scopes, the heat signature from 3 horses, including a newborn, would light up like a flare. She had minutes. Mira turned, paced to her pack, and pulled out a strip of fluorescent cloth. She ran back to the ridge, tied it to a dead tree, and pulled out a flare gun from her side pouch. With a sharp breath, she fired. The orange flame arced high and bright, visible for miles. She didn't wait to see if the vehicle reacted. She sprinted back down to the hollow. The stallion snorted, uncertain. Go, Mira said, waving her arms gently, her voice low but urgent. You have to go. The mare struggled to rise, legs shaking. The foal stumbled, fell, then rose again. The stallion didn't move. I'm trying to help you, she begged. They'll take you. You won't make it if you stay. The mare turned her head toward him. And at last, he moved, nudging the foal, guiding it with his body as the trio began climbing the other side of the ravine. Mira followed behind, her boots skidding. The wind was picking up again, the snow swirling thicker. The world was turning gray once more. They crested the hill together just as the SUV reached the ridge where Mira had fired the flare. She saw the brake lights glow. The vehicle paused. Then it turned, away from them, toward the flare. Mira dropped to the snow, gasping, her legs burning. The stallion paused beside her, towering and still. His breath brushed her face. He blinked once, slow, deliberate. And then, with a nudge to the mare, he turned and led them into the trees. Within moments they were gone, swallowed by the forest like a whisper into night. Mira stayed there, kneeling in the snow, her hands trembling, not from cold but from awe. She had seen something more than rare. More than endangered. She had seen survival written in the blood of a line they thought had vanished. And now, it pulsed through the tiny legs of a newborn foal hidden in the pines. The wind blew again, lifting the snow into ghost-like spirals. Mira stood, brushing the flakes from her shoulders. She pulled her camera close and looked toward the forest. Whatever story had begun with the storm, it wasn't finished. She would find them again. She had to. The forest thickened as the day waned, shadows stretching long across the snow-covered floor. A hush had settled, broken only by the occasional crack of frost-laden branches. Somewhere deep within, the stallion led his small, fragile family through narrow paths known only to hooves that remembered. His gait was patient, unwavering. Every few steps he would pause, ears flicking, nostrils flaring, not from fear but memory. Behind him the mare walked slower now. Her legs moved stiffly but her eyes were sharp. The foal, only a day old, wobbled between them, slipping at times, rising again without a sound. The snow was cruel under his tiny hooves, but something stronger than pain drove him forward. The stallion didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could hear their breaths. He could feel them in his bones. The blood that ran through the foal's veins was his. But it wasn't just legacy that kept him close. It was knowing. Not of men nor their machines but of something older. A truth passed not in words but in instincts honed over lifetimes. He had known before the snow came. He had known when the sky turned copper at dusk and the ravens flew too low. And now, as the sun began to fall once more, he knew something else. They were being followed. Far behind, beyond the layers of pines and shifting light, Mare crouched beside a frozen stream, adjusting her lens. She hadn't meant to follow, not at first. She told herself the flare had been enough. But the look in that stallion's eyes wouldn't leave her. There had been something behind them, not just intelligence. Not just loyalty. It was a kind of warning. And an invitation. The last time she'd seen eyes like that she was 12. Her father, a wildlife vet, had taken her to observe a captured puma, wounded, wild, cornered in a cage. Mare had leaned too close. Her father had pulled her back, whispering, "That look? That's not fear. That's knowing. He sees more than we do." Now, kneeling in the snow, watching the faint impressions left by the mustangs in the frost, she felt the same awareness crawl up her spine. The trail was deliberate, never crossing open land, always weaving behind fallen logs under the broken canopy. The stallion was hiding them, teaching the foal the terrain as they moved. Mare admired him more with every step she tracked. He wasn't just leading, he was preparing. For what, she wasn't yet sure. The sun sank further. Mare rose, tightened her coat and moved on, slower now. She didn't want to get too close. She didn't want to spook them. But she needed to see, she needed proof. Not for the world. For herself. For the part of her that had grown silent after her mother's death, after the loss of her own family fractured her belief in connection. She heard the mare's nicker before she saw them, soft and low, meant only for her foal. Mare dropped into a crouch again, heart catching. Through the trees she glimpsed them. The mare stood near a hollow trunk, sheltering the foal. The stallion, as always, stood watch. Only this time he wasn't facing the family. He was facing her. He knew. He had known the moment she entered the woods. He took a step forward, not charging, not fleeing. Mare didn't move. Her camera dangled against her chest, forgotten. One more step. Then another. He stopped 10 yards away. The silence between them cracked with tension. Mare's breath fogged the air in shallow bursts. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her pocket. Not for the camera, not for her field guide, but for a strip of hide leather, tanned and softened by time. Her mother's. A talisman from the old world, gifted to Mare the last time they'd ridden into the bighorns together. The mare they'd followed back then had died in childbirth. The foal had lived 2 hours. She held the leather out now, palm open. The stallion didn't look at the offering. He stared at her. And then, almost imperceptibly, he turned his head to the side. Mare followed his gaze. The woods ahead sloped upward, narrowing into a tight pass, barely wide enough for 3 horses. But above the trail, camouflaged by snow and lichen, she saw it. A snare. Not a crude one. This was steel cable rigged with a tension spring. Her heart thundered. Poachers. Real ones. She looked back at the stallion, stunned. He knew. He had led his family along a different path, not by accident but because he understood. Not just the forest but the danger that men brought. He hadn't been running blindly. He had been outsmarting them. Mare swallowed, stood slowly and backed away, careful not to break the eye contact. "I won't follow," she whispered. "Not unless you want me to." She turned her body, stepped sideways toward a thick pine. The stallion watched her go. Then, as the first stars pierced the dusk sky, he returned to his family. Mare stayed under the pine a long while. She didn't raise her camera. She didn't speak. She just listened. And in that listening she heard something rare, trust. Not fully given. But not denied. The next morning came harsh and bright, a storm brewing in the far distance. Mare packed camp quickly. She hadn't slept much. Dreams had come thick and strange, her mother's voice in languages she didn't recognize, the stallion galloping across stars, the foal crying beneath water. She shook them off. She had work to do. She returned to the snare, carefully disabling the spring and marking the location with bright tags. Then she sent the coordinates to headquarters, anonymous tip. No names. No story. Not yet. Let the facts come first. As she stood, preparing to move, she noticed something else, hoof prints circling the trap. Not just around it, over it. The stallion had known exactly where it was. He'd tested the ground, challenged the trap, then turned away. He'd left a message in the snow. We see you. We choose where we step. And Mira, for the first time in months, smiled. Not just because they were safe, but because she wasn't alone in seeing. That evening, she hiked to a ridge overlooking the valley, hoping for one last glimpse. She didn't expect to find them. The forest was vast and they moved like shadows. But she waited anyway. When the light began to fade, she saw a flicker between the trees, a flash of black mane, a soft whinny, the gleam of a newborn's coat in the sunset. They stood still for a moment, all three. Then the stallion looked up. Straight at her. He held her gaze for a breath. Then vanished into the dark. And Mira, heart full, whispered the words she had never dared speak aloud. Thank you. She didn't know where they were going. But she knew now. The stallion remembered the old paths, the hidden crossings, the stories buried in snow. And more than that, he knew something the world had forgotten. That survival wasn't just instinct. It was legacy. And for some it was a choice. The first tremor was so faint the birds didn't stir. Just a shiver under the snow, like the mountain had exhaled in its sleep. But the stallion felt it. His hooves stilled mid-step. Ears forward. Eyes narrow. The foal bumped against his leg, trying to suckle from the wind-chapped mare, but she was already tense, nose lifted, body frozen. The silence that followed was too quiet, as if the forest had forgotten to breathe. Mira, 2 ridges over, had just settled her lens on a distant elk herd when her instincts prickled. She didn't hear the rumble at first, but her fingers paused on the focus ring. The air tasted different, colder, sharper. Then came the sound, distant but deep, like thunder trapped beneath the skin of the world. Avalanche. She pivoted, heart hammering, tracking the noise. It wasn't behind her, it was across the valley where the Mustangs had last been. She dropped her gear and ran. The stallion's head snapped toward the peaks. Snow flurries danced in the air around him like warning sparks. He didn't wait. With a short, sharp nicker, he turned, nudged the foal into motion, and began pushing the mare forward, urgency in every movement. But they weren't fast enough. The mountain groaned again, louder now. Birds erupted from treetops. Ice cracked like gunfire. Then it came, white fury rolling down in slow, massive waves. Trees bowed. Rocks vanished. The very sky seemed to collapse in a curtain of roaring snow. The herd. The stallion jerked his head toward the open glade where he had once stood with the wild ones, his kin, his blood. They were still in that valley. And if the avalanche reached them, it would bury more than bodies. It would wipe out a lineage stretching back through the marrow of the land. He hesitated. The mare was limping. The foal stumbled again. They needed him. But so did the others. The choice wasn't easy. It never was. But it was already made. He touched noses with the mare, a soundless promise passing between them. Then he turned and galloped toward the chaos. Mira crested a rise just in time to see him disappear into the trees, heading straight toward the heart of the avalanche's path. Her scream died in her throat. Snow exploded through the valley, swallowing sound, snapping branches like twigs. She fell to her knees, shielding her face, tears frozen on her cheeks. He was gone. But he hadn't run from it. He'd run into it. The herd had scattered. Panic split them in every direction. Mares cried out for their foals. Young stallions wheeled in circles, uncertain. The old lead mare tried to rally them, but her calls were lost in the wind. And then, like a ghost from the storm, he arrived. The black stallion. He didn't waste time. With a shrill cry that pierced the avalanche's roar, he reared, front hooves slashing the air. Every eye turned. Every ear locked onto that sound. He charged toward the oldest gelding and snapped at his flank, forcing him forward. Then another. Then another. He was herding them. Driving them. Making them run, not away from the snow but toward a narrow gorge to the west. One the stallion remembered. A crack in the earth, just wide enough for bodies to slip through, where the mountain curved and deflected the worst of the slide. He had hidden there as a colt during a storm much like this. But time was running out. The avalanche surged closer. The lead mare faltered. A foal screamed. Snow swept into the valley like a tidal wave. And still he pushed them. He circled the herd, biting, shoving, risking everything. Until they moved. Together. As one. The herd bolted toward the gorge. The stallion stayed at the rear, driving the stragglers, risking the edge of the rushing snow. One mare slipped. He dropped his shoulder, shoved her upright, lost ground doing so, but didn't stop. The gorge rose before them, narrow, steep. The first horses plunged in, sliding on the icy rock. Mare watched from a distant slope, unable to move, unable to look away. She saw the stallion disappear behind the last of them just as the avalanche reached the valley floor. A wall of white hit the earth and surged forward, swallowing the trail, smashing trees flat. Mare's scream finally broke free, raw and useless. Snow billowed upward like smoke from a wound. Then silence. Long, empty silence. She ran again. Slid. Fall. Climbed. Her legs bled. Her fingers froze. But she didn't stop. She had to know. Had to find them. The gorge was deeper than it looked. Narrower. Most of the herd huddled near the far end, shaken but alive. Mare scanned their faces, counted coats. He wasn't there. She dropped to her knees, scouring the slope where snow had surged past the entrance. The path he'd taken was gone, smothered under feet of debris. Stone. Lumps. But then, a sound. A soft, wheezing snort. She scrambled toward it, hands digging, heart ready to break. A patch of black mane peeked through the snow. Please, she whispered, clawing with numb fingers. Please? It took minutes, maybe hours, but finally she cleared enough to see his eye. It blinked slowly. Then he shifted, barely, but it was enough. Alive. Trapped but alive. She cried out. Not from fear. From relief so sharp it stole the air from her lungs. The stallion was on his side, one leg pinned under a log. Snow pressed against his ribs. His nostrils flared, steam rising. But he didn't thrash. Didn't panic. He just stared at her. And waited. Because he knew she would come. Because he had trusted her. She dug faster now. Her hands bled. Her muscles screamed. But she didn't care. This was a promise she'd made without words. And she wasn't breaking it. Hours passed. The sun dipped. Then at last she cleared enough space to wedge a fallen branch under the log and lever it upward. He grunted, shifted, groaned. Then stood. Shaking. Bloody. But upright. Mare collapsed beside him, laughing through her sobs. You stupid, beautiful idiot, she whispered. You did it. You saved them. He lowered his head. And nudged her shoulder. Not hard. Just enough. As if to say, so did you. They walked slowly back to the gorge, her hand against his neck for balance. The herd parted as they approached, silent and reverent. The foal stepped forward, awkward and wide-eyed. The stallion snorted gently. Then touched noses with his son. The mare moved beside him, and Mare watched as something unspoken passed between them. Not just survival. Not just reunion. A bond forged in choice. The snow fell softer now. The storm had passed. The sky cleared to a deep cobalt, stars winking awake. Mare stood at the gorge's mouth, watching the herd begin to move again, this time as a single shape, like a current flowing across the land. The stallion paused halfway through, turned, and looked back at her. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just nodded. He understood. Then he turned, mane rippling, and vanished into the trees. She waited long after their sound had faded. Because some moments are meant to echo. And that one did. Not in words, but in the silence that followed. In the knowing. In the legacy that lived, still wild, still unbroken. And in the promise she would carry forever, to protect what remembered her back.